and our next presentation will be delivered by CEO of Omni, by Ken Cassar. And Ken Cassar is the CEO of Omni, a disruptive company with an extensive portfolio of deep technology inventions that will shift the frontier of artificial intelligence, massively increase the surface area of AI application, and usher in a new era of collaborative intelligence. I can't wait to go deeper around that. He is fascinated by the new paths this technology will open and is specifically interested in engaging with stakeholders involved and interested and impacted by machine learning. Ken is open for discussion and win-win collaborations in this area with thought leaders in the field, creation and participation in impactful and meaningful exploratory projects, and in talking to leaders who are patient, visionary, and who can contribute to helping maximize Omni's enabling impact on the world. So, with my blessed pleasure, I would like to invite Ken to join me here on this virtual stage. Hello, Ken.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Hey, it's so great to have you. And just by reading your description, I thought maybe you know the secret recipe or where to find those visionary leaders, the ones who would be driven to create something bigger, to be driven by technology.
Let's go out and find them.
Let's go and find them. So we are up for your presentation. Maybe you've heard we discussed a couple of most common myths about robots with our last speakers, but hopefully you'll do some myth busting on AI during your presentation.
Let's do that. So thank you for inviting me to speak at Boost AI. It's a real honor. I'm sorry I'm not there in person. I love the topic of myths in AI. I'm not an AI expert in any traditional sense, and my first contact with AI was 3 years ago when I co-founded Omni. And my co-founder Angelo he invented a functional neurosymbolic AI architecture. We spent 2.5 years exploring, expanding those inventions, the theory, implementing the technology, testing it and validating it. We've written a number of patents. And I'm giving you this background because as somebody who didn't have any preconceived ideas about AI, I had the pleasure and the challenge of coming into an industry with a very deep and disruptive technology and trying to figure out how to make a business out of this technology. And along the way, I've spoken to hundreds and hundreds of experts in the field and hundreds of participants in the field and business people and regulators and people with all kinds of interests. And through that process, I've noticed some interesting things. So that's what I want to talk about today. So let's look at myth number one. It was called myth, so I'm going to call it myth number one. And the first thing I noticed about AI is that how people talk about it. So how people talk about something, the words that they use, the narratives that they use, tell a lot about how they perceive what they're talking about. And one of the things that struck me really early on was how people kept using the term ethical AI and trustworthy AI and fair AI and responsible AI. And it's kind of like everybody is talking about AI like it is a sentient being and not the statistical pattern recognition technology that it is. And it seems like everybody's waiting for AI to step up and become more responsible and become more ethical and become more trustworthy. And so I guess myth number one is that, AI is not going to step up and become responsible or ethical or trustworthy. That's up to us. So there were two sides as I started to understand the situation. I saw that there were two sides to the problem. The first side is that AI just is not empirically explainable the way it stands today. The new technologies that are coming, including ours, will make it empirically explainable, but for now it's not. And the other problem is that humans seem to be okay rushing towards deploying something in circumstances where they don't empirically understand, or they cannot explain, or they cannot control, in some circumstances, these things, this technology that they're deploying. And that's creating a real dichotomy. AI has just exponentially increased in its value and its capabilities and the infrastructure that surrounds it and makes it possible over the last few years. And it's done so, as we all know, because of the exponential availability of compute power, and more importantly, the exponential availability of digital data. And the same exponential availability of digital data is what drives the demand for AI. So we have a situation where the demand, the necessity of deploying AI is overriding the uncertainty of being able to understand and control the technology. And it is starting to create an evolving backlash, we know that, but it's also starting to create an evolving awareness and efforts to regulate and govern AI, which are fantastic things. And my hope in relation to this myth is that new technologies like ours, as they diffuse and as they provide humans with a full understanding, empirical understanding of their AI and control over its outputs, AI will just normalize and it'll become very unspecial. And the techniques that we use to debug normal things that we program will become available for AI. And we will be able to deploy AI with the same confidence and the same predictability that we deploy anything else. And when that happens, my hope is that we stop talking about ethical AI and we start talking about ethical humans using AI. And we stop talking about responsible AI and start talking about responsible humans using AI. I remember watching a couple of months ago, Jack Dorsey from Twitter and Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook testifying before Congress in the United States about artificial intelligence and algorithmic decision-making. And both of them said the same thing. They kind of came across, and I'm paraphrasing here, but saying that, we wish we could understand how our algorithms work and that we could control them better. And, the time is coming, the technology is coming, and it's going to be an interesting process as the world adopts to having control over AI, to see how we codify and implement our intentions in our AI deployments. So the second thing that I noticed very early on in my exploration of AI was how ready and willing many entities and companies are to deploy AI systems over which they have insufficient control. And AI is an amazing and an incredible tool, and it's capable of so many things. And the speaker before me was talking about robots that just increase the value of public services to the citizens, and all this is amazing stuff. And as with any tool, we use tools to delegate. We delegate to tools. So we build tools that will make something better, easier, faster, and then we delegate them a process to those tools. But with AI, because we don't have empirical explanations on how each output is made, an output from an AI system tends to become the decision. And we don't have the means to deliberate and think about that decision or assess it or identify any issues with it or resolve those issues in real time. So when we've deployed an AI system, largely we are either consuming all the decisions that AI model gives us, or we're consuming none of them. And that looks a lot like abdication sometimes. We're less delegating to AI, and sometimes we are abdicating AI to AI. And that's absolutely fine in so many use cases. If you're doing predictive maintenance on a wind turbine by listening to the bearing sounds, then that's an excellent use case. But when we come to AI applications that are potentially harmful to humans, then abdication possibly isn't our best route. And as the pressure to deploy AI to remain competitive in a number of fields grows, we're increasingly being forced sometimes to abdicate to AI, just because if we don't, the market will overtake us. So one of the things that I hope will change over time as explainability becomes more common is our ability to build the decision-making processes which do not consume the predictions of AI models whole and unexplained. And that allows us to create collaborative decision-making systems where humans are working with and their decision-making abilities are enhanced by AI models. So the third myth that I always I've noticed is that there's a lot of discourse in the industry and a lot of conversations that I've heard about the performance of AI models in terms of precision and accuracy and recall and all the performative metrics and absolute metrics that we hold so dear and are very important to us. And this all indicates when we're looking at those performance metrics, we're always looking at how well an AI model fits to the data. But fitting the data and being fit for purpose are not the same thing. And right now, I think there's a bit of a myth that goes that given enough data, AI will become fit for purpose. But there's a number of things that strike me about that concept and that myth. And the first is that I never wake up in the morning hoping that today and tomorrow will be exactly the same as yesterday was. And with AI systems that are using historical data to decide on the present, there is a tendency towards moving towards a sameness or a mean or an average. And really, as we start to deploy AI systems, we're very, very quickly discovering that, fitness for purpose isn't always the same as fitting the data. One of the big impacts and use cases for our technology is in bias detection. And we dived very, very deeply into looking at bias and how it's perceived and what's done about it now. And one of the things we discover, one of the things that's obvious, when you're talking about bias, is that not all bias is bad. And when you ask somebody, how much of the bias in your system would you like to eliminate? And somebody sometimes tells you, well, all of it. Well, you can't eliminate all of it, nor should you want to eliminate all of it. So what becomes interesting when you have empirical explanations coming out of a model in real time is that you're actually able to measure the bias in any given transaction. If you have a protected feature, say gender, then you can understand precisely what bias is in a specific transaction and how that would be different if that same subject was male. And once that's possible, then the next step in that is to actually assess that bias, to measure that bias, assess it, and decide, is this particular component of the bias, is it something I should act upon? And if it is something I should act upon, how should I act upon it? And this is going to open up a whole new branch of thinking and businesses, to be honest, because this is all very domain specific and subjective. But there is a difference between fitness to data and fitness for purpose. And I'll just wrap this up with the fourth myth, and this one's a bit darker, I think. There's a lot of discussion about regulation and governance and risk in the market right now. And everyone is well aware that the current AI models that are being used, particularly in human impacting applications, through finance, through healthcare, through insurance and HR and things like that, there are accumulated and latent risks in all the decisions that are being made. And these risks are accumulating. People, there are biases, there are discriminatory decisions, there are algorithmic decisions that disadvantage people. And because these aren't really very clearly and empirically understood, they are accumulating within everybody's businesses and systems. And the accumulated weight of these unseen risks and unintended consequences, and the inability to accurately and precisely identify them and mitigate them, is constantly growing. And if we don't figure out ways, and if we don't find ways to mitigate these risks and to go back and look at the legacy that we have within our applications and systems, then there will come a time when the litigation that starts to evolve around discriminatory behavior, unfair decisions, or somehow disadvantaging or harming humans or groups of humans will start to come home to roost, so to speak. And the impacts of these shortcomings in black box AI will start to become very, very clear when people start to get sued, when entities start to get sued for stuff that happened 6 months ago by 100 different clients or 1,000 different clients in some form of class action suit. So the fact that we can continue to deploy AI without understanding the risks and without being able to forensically measure and mitigate the risks or avoid them entirely in the first place, I believe is another myth. Because the combination of the regulatory pressures, the market pressures on governance, and the legal jeopardy of just having an accumulation of decisions within your legacy business processes that could come home to roost in terms of litigation is too much of a weight to bear, and I think that will become obvious. So, thank you very much for listening to my four myths and observations for AI.
They are not the only myths that are there in the market, and one of the most popular one, and I'm interested to hear your opinion about that AI winter is coming again. So what do you think about it?
I actually believe that if something fundamental doesn't change, it is. And then this last factor I spoke about the accumulating weight of expectations and latent liability, I think could lead to it. We're very excited about the technology we're bringing to market because we hope it'll create a big enough inflection and other technologies like ours to avoid that AI winter.
You mentioned one thing, and our speakers have spoken a lot about it, that AI will progress together with humans and robots as well. They're not something intelligent. They are what we put in their heads. But what you mentioned, and you said that we shouldn't wait for them to step up. So do you think that we are not going to make it ourselves, or what's the main reason?
No, AI is a tool. It's a tool we should use, not a tool we should abdicate to. AI is not going to become responsible. We have to become responsible in using AI. And what will change over the course of the next, I personally believe that in 10 years' time, black box AI technologies won't exist anymore, and all AI will be explainable. I don't think ours will be the only technology that drives that. There's a lot of clever people in this world. We're one of the first ones. But all AI will be transparent and white box in the next 5 to 10 years. So it's up to us to be ethical, and it's up to us to be responsible, up to us to be trustworthy And we all know that not all human beings are ethical and trustworthy and responsible, but things will change when we have the ability to know that if somebody is not being ethical or responsible or trustworthy, they're doing it because they choose to, not because they don't have the tools to be so. And then you can hold people accountable.
I see. And also, there is such thing like artificial general intelligence. So how close do you think we are to achieve it?
This is a debate I have with my co-founder, Genius, quite often. Personally, I don't think we'll ever get there. Personally, he's of a different opinion. There's more to intelligence than data, and there's more to intelligence than compute, in my view. I think there's something about humans and living creatures that we're never going to be able to replicate in bits.
Well, it would be interesting to hear your co-founder's opinion about that, what contra-arguments he would have. And this is how the discussion and exchange of opinions starts rolling. But as well, as a founder, maybe you could share what are the vibes in your company? Are your employees exciting working on such technology, future-facing, and are there any myths about how the company is going to grow within the 5 years?
I'd like to think there's no myths, but running a startup is challenging, and running any startup is challenging. The technology that we've invented is even more challenging because it's a very, very deep technology. So it's actually an AI architecture. And as an architecture, it sits at the very bottom of the AI tech stack, which is great because it means it's enabling everything in the tech stack. And then there's nothing within the AI ecosystem or tech stack that our technology will not add value to. But at the same time, it's challenging because it's completely agnostic. It's use case agnostic and model and data agnostic. So there's a big world out there. And when you're a startup and you're resource limited and you don't have the time or the resource or the capital to grow as fast as you want to, it's very challenging to figure out which parts of the market can create value the quickest and which parts of the market can give you the momentum you need the quickest. Everybody's excited about it. We all work every day to just bring this technology closer and closer to the market.
And maybe you can bust this myth, or you can say it's true that by 2050 we will, or by 2030 we will run out of all the specialists. With such a big demand of specialists in AI, in engineering, will we have enough people to support it and then create those products?
That's an interesting question and completely dichotomous to the fear that everybody has of AI taking over everybody's jobs. You'd think if that was true, then we'd have lots of people. I don't know. So just again, sorry, I'm going to talk about our technology a little, but when an AI model like ours provides you with the empirical explanation data that describes precisely how an input became an output, each procedural step and its impact upon that output, that is the raw material for an explanation. But that's not an explanation. Explanations are context-specific, domain-specific, and audience-specific. And I genuinely believe, and I'm very hopeful, that as technologies like ours become available, whole industries are going to grow up around taking raw explanation data and creating and interpreting and delivering those explanations in an audience-appropriate and context-appropriate way. So I think as technology improves, the need for hardcore engineering will diminish as just things like auto AI and things like that, model discovery and things like that become more commonplace and easier to use. But I think there's a lot of what we would today consider softer skills that will become much more in demand. And then one thing I like about that is it will favor wisdom and experience over kind of youth and vigor. And
So-
then that'll be a nice thing to watch.
The golden ages for engineers will soon end. This is what you're trying to say.
We create, as a globe, we create technology fast enough to always keep the engineers busy.